But if you look forward to the 1644 London Baptist Confession, that is actually a 5-point Calvinistic statement.
Yeah.
And then as we continue to go from there after the English Civil War, the particular Baptists really become the majority of Baptists in England. And you have a lot of really bad Christology and Trinitarian sort of ontology coming amongst the general Baptists. And so that really waned and almost died. And so by the 1700s, Reformed Baptists are the majority in England. And so, and they really associated in contrast with the general Baptists, who were talking with more Anabaptists and Mennonites and so forth. But they were more associated with their Calvinistic forebears, who were Puritans. And so if we take a step back, looking at Baptist history as a whole, there actually is a greater particular Baptist footprint, but because the largest, and by a long shot, contemporary sort of Baptist denomination is one that is more Arminian in its theological disposition, sociological disposition, there is the common misconception that, all Baptists, that are conservative in their theology are in fact Arminian. Welcome to another episode of White Horse Inn. We're currently in a series working through the misconceptions of the Reformed traditions that are seated at the table. Today we're exploring the Baptist tradition, the often misunderstood realities of it, that is grounded in individualism. Some might even say it's American as apple pie, which is what Bob said a couple of days ago. It's less intellectually sophisticated and even more sectarian. But the truth is, it's a little bit more layered than that. And today, we're going to explore those layers, answering questions including, what is freedom of conscience, why the emphasis on religious liberty, and why the emphasis on regenerate church membership, and where did that come from? I'm here to do that today with Michael Horton, Justin Holcomb, Bob Hiller, and I'm Walter Strickland. All righty, guys. So I know there's some misconceptions out there, so let's start working our way through them.
Aren't Baptists historically Arminian?
Well, you know what? That's a good place to start. So this is a question or misconception that I often hear, strictly because of the pervasiveness of the Southern Baptist Convention today. If you look at the Southern Baptist landscape, which it's almost seems to be for many synonymous with being Baptist in America, which is certainly not. There are several different more conservative denominations, the General Association of Regular Baptists. We do have more progressive Baptist denominations, and so on and so forth. Some that are more mixed in their disposition or composition. We have the Progressive National Baptist Convention, which folks would assume it's progressive in its theology. It's actually fairly orthodox in its theology, but very progressive in its social engagement, because it was established in 1963 with Martin Luther King Jr., Daddy King, Garner C. Taylor, and others. But all that to say, but because the SBC is so prevalent and so much in the news, because the news loves to love the SBC in the worst way, it just seems as if there is a focus there. And the SBC in particular has had this missiological ethos that really was the engine of that was that everybody, if presented with an opportunity to receive Christ as Lord, then they had the choice to do it. And so fast forwarding even forward to the middle of the 20th century, well, really even the 1970s and 80s, there was a reality called the conservative resurgence in the Southern Baptist Convention. And at that moment in the denomination's history, there was a lot of neo-Orthodox thinking and even just modernist liberal thinking in our seminaries, but that didn't parallel with what was going on in the pews in the churches. So what was going on is that there was a recognition by some denominational leaders to say, we need to correct what's going on in the seminaries. So there was a very interesting and it just takes advantage of our congregational polity. The plan was this: if we get 10 consecutive conservative presidents who then appoints people to our committee on committees, who then appoints people to the Committee on Nominations. They'll appoint conservatives into the boards that are on our seminaries and our mission boards, et cetera. So if you do that for 10 consecutive years, you get a conservative majority in those on those boards. And so then you end up bringing in conservative presidents and so on and so forth, or people who are just historic Christians in those spaces. So when that came about, the leaders of that conservative resurgence, they were overtly Arminian in their soteriology. So what happens is that when these folks bring back the Bible, they bring back with it other things like dispensationalism, a very heavy-handed understanding of biblical complementarity, and then also they bring back, or they come with a very Arminian sort of reality for soteriology. So since then, in Baptist life, I mean, there's been the conservative resurgence had its sort of cherry on top in 2000 with the Baptist Faith and Message 2000, saying we have to, affirm this in our doctrinal statement. But by the time I got to seminary in 2006, there was a budding movement that was drawing upon the particular Baptist tradition that actually was the majority going all the way back to the 1630s and 1640s. And so now there's a conversation going on that is bringing more Reformed thinkers to the table, that the Reformed Baptist sort of conversation is actually one that today is actually fairly robust within the SBC, but it was very contentious for a while. I remember there was a conference that was held by held at Ridgecrest Conference Center, which is like a haven for the SBC for conferences and things like that in Western North Carolina. The conversation was essentially to be had between those who are traditionalists, which in the SBC they have said is to be more Arminian, General Baptist, and then the Reformed Baptists came and they were being represented by the founders. And they were basically having this conversation about how the two can coexist within the SBC. So I know that's a sort of a rambly sort of way to answer the question, but
no, that was way more robust than I even knew to consider. That's what's fun about getting a historical answer with a theologian is going, because that thing, there's so much, there's so many contours and social settings and institutional pieces that feed into that misconception that you just kind of just outlined. So it didn't sound rambly to me.
Yeah.
I liked it.
So Walter, can I ask a question, follow up on this? Mm-hmm. Just to kind of keep going with it.
No, go ahead.
So there's an Arminian bent in some of the Southern Baptist Convention, but not all. Is everyone in the Southern Baptist Convention Arminian, or is there a Calvinistic side as well? And maybe this is the way of asking the question: what is the confessional standard within Baptist life? Like, what makes somebody a Baptist?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, it is a mixed body in that regard. Not as in there are people who I think Mike got my backpedal. So as far as your specific question, Bob, there are people who would say that they're more Arminian leaning and then more Reformed Calvinistic leaning within the Southern Baptist Convention. The Baptist Faith and Message 2000 is intentionally broad enough for both to exist within its bounds. And that goes all the way back to the fact that, there was the English separatist movement. And what we see from there is fairly early on in 1600s and 1610s, there was, the General Baptists became a sort of identifiable group. At that point, you wouldn't really call them Arminian because Arminius was still around at that time. And so, but later they would say, yes, Arminian. Yeah.
And they would claim a kind of Mennonite background, right? They were close to the Mennonites, unlike the Calvinistic Baptists.
For sure. And then the Calvinistic Baptist, the particular Baptist, and this is all, the general and particular Baptist is all about how we discuss the atonement's extent.
Okay.
And this emerged in like the 1630s, 1640s. And just a quick note about the particular Baptist, to say that there were all 5-point Calvinists, I know that we just kind of don't like all the ways that is articulated. However, but to say they're all 5-point Calvinists is a misnomer. They were either Emeraldian or they were 5-point Calvinists. And so even
And explain Emeraldian.
Yeah, Emeraldian.
yeah, so they would say that there's an unlimited atonement.
Okay.
And so
Hypothetically, everybody is saved by the blood of Christ. Hypothetically, but not actually.
Yeah. But if you look forward to the 1644 London Baptist Confession, that is actually a 5-point Calvinistic statement.
Yeah.
And then as we continue to go from there after the English Civil War, the particular Baptists really become the majority of Baptists in England. And you have a lot of really bad Christology and Trinitarian sort of ontology coming amongst the general Baptists. And so that really waned and almost died. And so by the 1700s, Reformed Baptists are the majority in England. And so, and they really associated in contrast with the general Baptists who were talking with more Anabaptists and Mennonites and so forth. But they were more associated with their Calvinistic forebears who were Puritans. And so if we take a step back, looking at Baptist history as a whole, there actually is a greater particular Baptist footprint, but because the largest, and by a long shot, contemporary sort of Baptist denomination is one that is more Arminian in its theological disposition, sociological disposition, there is the common misconception that, all Baptists, that are conservative in their theology are in fact Arminian.
Interesting. We are trying to deal with misconceptions, and one of the misconceptions is that the Baptists have no confessional or creedal standard. So then, what is it that makes one a distinct Baptist? Or, I mean, you just referenced the London Baptist Convention. Yeah. So there is a confessional standard in some Baptist circles, at least.
There is the London Baptist Confession, 1644. In 1689, which is the Baptist Confession of Faith, which we have seen a resurgence of as of late, especially amongst those who are obviously Reformed Baptist. As we jump to the States, there's the 1742 Philadelphia Confession of Faith, which is a particular Baptist statement. There's more from there. Even the Baptist Faith and Message, the first iteration of that was during the fundamentalist modernist controversy in 1925. There's another version in 63, and then also the one I just referenced in 2000. But all that to say, there are confessions of faith that help define what it means to be Baptist. But there are some Baptist distinctives. I mean, in addition to the Catholicity of Baptists, which many of my Baptist brethren and sistren would get squeamish at me talking about Baptist Catholicity, which is our affirmation.
Makes me squeamish if that helps.
Well, and with that, I'm just talking about the Baptist affirmation of the historic creeds like Nicaea, the Trinity. I mean, I know that there's a discussion about what happened in 2024 at the Southern Baptist Convention about that, but there is an affirmation of Trinitarian theology, Chalcedon, hypostatic union, and things like that. There is that sort of Catholic affirmation. But as far as the uniqueness of Baptist life, there is a reality that's very much in the forefront, that every person is going to stand before God themselves, and they will answer to God for what they have done with Christ. And then because of that decision, they are either involved, baptized, and therefore involved in the local church, comprised of regenerate church members, and those people who are their freedom of conscience allows them to fully respond to the call of the gospel. And again, I say that sort of in general terms because of the general and particular sort of sociological framework there. And then they are then baptized. They are part of a regenerate church body, and that group of regenerate church members creates an autonomous local church that has the ability to then have affiliation with other sort of Baptist associations, denominations, and bodies, and so forth. So really, that sole competency is one of the foundational ideas that really marks a Baptist, because it really then begins to chart a course for some of those Baptist distinctives that really go back to its founding. We talked about the separatist, or which separatist, I know that has poor and negative connotations, but the reformational or the reform movement, we can say, that comes out of the Church of England. they were really trying to go back to the New Testament in such a way that's more consistent with their convictions, trying to be free from the state church, as we mentioned before, saying that there should be some religious liberty there, saying that the state should have no mediator between the believer or the individual and God. That person will have to stand before God themselves. And so a lot of those ideas of freedom of conscience and religious liberty, those kinds of doctrines emerge from this idea of being able to make that decision. And I know that's sort of rife with the accusation of individualism, and we can talk about that, but I do think there's a lot to be discussed there.
Yeah, Walter, let me ask this question. I mean, there are a lot of things that come out of that the fruit of that I think we would appreciate, like the separation of church and state, the freedom of conscience, and so forth. Things that we would agree with. But I guess my question to you would be, in our Reformed point of view, you come to the word creates the church. Faith comes by hearing the word of Christ. And so it's actually the means of grace, preaching, baptism, and the Lord's Supper that create the church. Mm-hmm. Faith comes out of that, but the church is where that's done, where that happens. And faith comes out of that. And so you can have lots of people who are, it's a mixed body. You have the wheat and the tares growing together until the harvest. But the reality of the church isn't whether there are weeds in God's garden, but whether that ministry is taking place. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's where the church is. It seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, it's just the opposite in the Baptist approach. It's actually individuals choosing, and that faith creates the church. And so it's not the community created by the word and the sacraments. It's the word and the sacraments are things that are done by and with individuals. I form a church out of a bunch of people willing, like a social contract, forming a republic. Individuals coming together, deciding the same thing, rather than being formed into a community by the same thing. Does that?
Yeah, that's helpful. I think what my response would be is that I think we would agree that the church is a place where the gospel is proclaimed, and the sacraments, and Baptists many of them would say the ordinances are taken, and so that's what goes on in the church house. As far as what membership looks like in that local church, I think that's where the distinction is. So people can come to a church that is doing word and sacrament who don't know who Christ is. They're there learning about who Christ is. They're hearing the word preached. They're hearing testimony of what Christ has done. They're even observing those who are taking the supper in those ways. But those who are members of that church, we would say that they're people who are people of the new covenant. And the entry into that new covenant people is Christ. And so if somebody off the street comes into a Baptist church, they're welcome to come, they're welcome to see, they're welcome to participate in some ways, for sure, as they're hearing the message of Christ and the forgiveness of sin, which they're in need of. But then it's when they then hear the word, and again, there is a distinction between the ways in which the particular and a General Baptist would talk about what happens at conversion and the order of things there. So I'm trying to be general to speak broadly. But someone enters into the new covenant, let's just say that, through Christ's death and resurrection. That they have a credible profession of faith, in which that's basically them declaring that I'm dead in my trespasses and sins. I need Christ's, atonement for my sin. And then because of that, I'm made alive. And this is all energized by the power of the Holy Spirit. So at that point, they are baptized as a sign and seal of their being a part of this community. And then the membership sort of discussion to that particular local church is kind of like two sides of the same coin with baptism and membership. They sort of happen kind of simultaneously. And so I guess I would say somebody can't just make a church. There are prescribed things that need to happen there, word, sacrament, but then the members are those who have identified themselves with Christ as being people part of the new covenant. Does that clarify a little bit, Mike? Or is that
Yeah. But basically the church is found, the source of any particular church is a group of people who are regenerate and come together to form a corporate body. Is that fair?
Well, in some ways, I would say that there certainly is established on the gospel. I know you're not pushing back against that.
Yeah, that's fair.
So there is no church without the gospel. And I know that you're not pushing it back against that. But what I'm trying to articulate is that it is those people come together standing on the rock who is Christ, and then becoming a local expression of the universal people of God as a new covenant people. That's how a church would be formulated.
So let me ask you this then. What is the role of the pastor? And what is the ecclesiastical authority? Because the misconception is that the priesthood of all, the overvaluation of the priesthood of all believers in the Baptist church undermines ecclesiastical authority. I'm asking that question for Justin. So if you wouldn't
For Bishop Holcomb.
Yeah.
over.
We don't like any accountability. We hate denominations.
Ooh, this is attractive.
We hate all for all the individuals out there. We are for you.
That's
Christ for you, Baptists also for you. Different ways.
For sure.
For you.
So that is a misconception. So the priesthood of believer, it doesn't nullify sort of pastoral or ecclesiological authority. What that means is that we have direct access to our Lord, and it's not mediated by a priest. And I think we would all affirm that. I do think that there are some Baptists who, in fairly low church context, who would minimize the authority of leadership in such a way that it's unhelpful. But I mean, Baptists have historically affirmed the office of pastor, elder, overseer, as we see it in the pastoral epistles. Pastors, they don't mediate salvation or ongoing grace, but they point us to the one who is our source of salvation and grace. And really, the pastoral authority is based upon scriptural authority and not being a part of this specific group necessarily. One thing I would say is that the pastors are those who are voted on congregationally within churches, and they're people who are appointed to the office because the people in that congregation have recognized them as somebody who is obviously meeting the pastoral requirements in the epistles, but pastoral epistles, but somebody who meets those, and therefore is someone that they would trust to help shepherd them towards the good shepherd, and so to guide them towards the good shepherd. And so, in many ways, I, as a pastor in a Baptist church, I am constantly pointing people like past me to Christ. And they have said, as a church body, we believe and we trust that collectively, because we've seen your doctrine, we've watched your life, and we have together understood that we would submit to your pointing us to Christ, that they would follow your leadership in that way. And this is the blessing and the curse of Baptist life. Somebody could, Mike, as you say, just sort of establish a church in the worst sense, almost willy-nilly, right? But churches that are healthy, they wouldn't run away from association, partnership, and even agreement on shared documents to sort of guide their collective sort of theological engagement, like a Baptist Faith and Message and has functioned in the SBC. So, but what happens is that if a church chooses to go against those documents that bring those churches together, then those who are still a part of that body could vote them out, but they don't have the ability to tell that individual church what to do in their own local church. And so that's one of the uniquenesses of Baptist life, that as far as our cooperative efforts, they're a voluntary association, but even though that the association is there, it is voluntary, but they can be voted out by those who are also voluntarily being together under those shared documents.
Makes sense.
So again, we're looking at misconceptions. And so one of the misconceptions is related to baptism and Lord's Supper, that they're merely symbolic gestures. So dive into it but specifically with baptism, that they're trying to withhold something from children. And those of us who baptize children would say you are withholding it, but there's a misconception built in with on the ordinances, which every time we talk about sacraments, you kind of go give a little asterisk ordinance, because that's the language that's there. Mm-hmm. So can you dive in on any Baptist misconceptions or misconceptions about the Baptist view of baptism and Lord's Supper?
Yeah. So in which, and the elephant in the room for the Baptist is the language there. Is it ordinances? Is it sacraments? So is it Eucharist? Well, I mean, I'm very comfortable with Eucharist, Thanksgiving, if I'm recalling that right. I mean,
yep.
So the language is really irrelevant. But I think what Baptists try to push away from is the regenerating sort of power that are given to sacraments in the Roman Catholic Church. So they just sort of switch the wording out. So that's why there's that tussle there. And so that's why you hear me sort of accommodating that sort of existential angst that it causes Baptists to hear that language out of a Baptist.
Well, it happens in other traditions with like the Nicene Creed, the one holy Catholic Apostolic Church, and people start twitching and going small c, and they just weird out. They can't just say it. They have to like qualify it. And by the time you're done qualifying, you've ended up not saying the creed you're trying to say. Anyway,
there's an asterisk on the slide in the church where they say it so they can see it below.
Not Roman Catholic.
Which is really so. As far as the Lord's Supper and baptism, they're merely a gesture. So the reason why this is a misconception, especially, I would definitely understand this more if I was coming from one of your traditions, going to some Baptist churches who spend so much time explaining away the value of baptism, saying this is not salvific, this is not going to do anything, this water is just nothing. So it's almost like, well, what are we doing here then? Well, didn't Jesus, command us to be baptized? Well, and for what? So we can not, it's like a negative theology almost. Mm-hmm. So, and then also with the supper, there's just a memorial view that is very popular within the SBC in particular. And I speak as a Southern Baptist, that's why I'm talking about the SBC often. But there's a memorial view, a Zwinglian view, which just sees it as a, just kind of like a symbol, a token. The Spirit is, there in the same way the Spirit would be present in your own prayer closet at your house. There's nothing special about this moment. But the reality is that if we look at Baptist history, the spiritual presence position, which is a more reformed view of the supper, this is my body, is interpreted to mean that Christ promises his spiritual presence at the supper, is actually the predominant position amongst Baptists. And so, and I think what we're seeing is a move back towards a spiritual presence baseline within many more evangelical or even conservative Baptist environments. And so I think that kind of like a good mystical reality, I think is coming back, because there's such a push away from anything that was Spirit-filled because of a desire not to be Pentecostal. There was, I think we're finally getting over that. So I do think that there has been, especially coming out of the fundamentalist modernist controversy, I would even say some of the demythologizing that was going on of the faith stayed there with some Baptists in some ways. That got to us in some ways while we were trying to push it away eventually in the conservative resurgence. Those, just minimizing the significance of the ordinances or the sacraments in the life of the church really became a means of looking to Christ alone and not allowing anything to cloud our view towards Christ.
It's my understanding then that when we do come to the ordinance of the Lord's Supper, you only ever get grape juice because all Baptists are teetotalers. Is that a misconception, or am I reading things the wrong way?
So I would say this. There is one Baptist church that I know gives the option of having grape juice or wine. And so, that's an interesting question. So this is more historically oriented as far as why contemporary Baptists do it this way. I mean, in the 1800s, American Baptists, they were deeply involved in the temperance and prohibition movements. At that time, alcohol abuse was rampant. There was tearing families apart, especially amongst working class people. And just out of a concern for the family, which is obviously a good thing, a good gift in the scriptures, many Baptists, they just practice total abstinence from as kind of a moral safeguard. But since then, we've seen some people read and misread, I think, some texts to explain away the wine in those texts. I won't go into a bunch of details, but I mean, I've seen people, explain away Timothy's use of wine given to him by Paul for his stomach. I've seen people explain away the passage where Jesus turns water into wine. And it's really out of a desire to have a witness that's not stained by the worst abuses of alcohol. And so on a good side of this, I do think there is a desire not to be associated with things that are a stumbling block to others. And I think that begins to rule the roost. So that sort of exegesis that begins to explain away instances of wine in the New Testament, but also a desire to not cause a brother or sister to stumble, really begin to become the sort of foreground reasons for an abstinence from, alcohol. But really, it began in the 1800s during the temperance movement, prohibition movements.
So, Walter, I grew up with my parents, my aunts and uncles, Southern Baptist, and I heard very often this idea of the age of accountability. And, essentially, people have to reach the age of accountability before they're held responsible for their own sins. Is that something that most Southern Baptists believe, and how does that fit with original sin?
Yeah, so there are actually, I'd say many Southern Baptists who would affirm an age of accountability. And again, if you look at Baptist history, you're seeing this split between the particular Baptist and the general Baptist. Particular Baptists would take a more reformed stance on it and say, well, if an infant dies and they're elect, then they're secure. But amongst general Baptists, many of them would hold to an age of accountability, coming out of passages like, Jesus said that all the children should come to me. That use of toteknion, people would read certain ideas of protection into that. There's some people who look back at the bar mitzvah in Israel and say that there's some significance there of a certain age, and at that point they are now held accountable to their sins if they were to die. And so for many, that's really the logic there. I think that as we think about Baptist practice with children, I think that begins to perpetuate because many Baptists would not allow their kids to take the supper. They're unbaptized until they are regenerate and things of that nature. So the question emerges: do Baptists raise their children as pagans?
So do Baptists treat their kids like pagans? Well, you gave us a really great question and misconception. Now I want an answer.
Okay,
let's go to that. But after my question, Justin,
so go ahead and
the original sin.
Yeah,
If a person is not held accountable until a certain age, then does that mean that they are they aren't liable to God's judgment before then.
Yeah, and again, this is amongst those who would take are more among the Arminian General Baptistic strain of the denomination, and even Baptist life in general. They would basically hold to kind of a universal prevenient grace as a means of getting a child to that point. And again, Reformed Baptists would take a more classical Reformed position that if a child was elect and they're secure, but the person who is a General Baptist is going to see that universal prevenient grace because they would actually hold to some sort of federal headship of sorts, and then they would say that there's provision there in that way. Which for me, I just don't find any exegetical grounds for that universal prevenient grace that is a requirement for to maintain that kind of a position.
Okay, back to the pagan kid thing. And there's different ways this gets played out.
Yeah.
So it's the misconception because we've seen you with your children. They show up on video sometimes. And you don't treat them as if then assuming that they're pagan. So that misconception is like, okay, they're withholding them from baptism, Lord's Supper, and treating them like reprobate until proven otherwise, type of thing. So it maybe fix my misconception better,
yeah, that's a fair question. Yeah, so I think this comes from a lot of children in Baptist churches, depending on, and again, because of local church autonomy, it fleshes itself out in ways that are unique in different churches, but there's some similarities for sure. The reason why this gets accused of us, this misconception is there, because if you were to come from a Presbyterian church and then come to a Baptist church, they said, well, the kids can't take the supper, as you said, Justin, they're not baptized. And so we don't do catechesis in the same way. So what do you do for your kids? You just treat them like they're, reprobate or something like that. So, but the reality is that I know the pagan language itself is offensive to some Baptists because, it sort of has that sort of Old Testament Babylonian, Canaanite, Moabite sort of feel to it.
That language has been used like that. So I was just being playful. With the misconceptions to the pagan thing.
For sure. Yeah. So I would say, because I would associate that word with that kind of language. I would say if you have a Baptist friend, pose the question in a different way, because they would associate.
So why don't you like children? Is that a better way?
Yeah. Is your child a Canaanite?
Yeah. And are you training them to be a Canaanite?
Wow. Right.
But the reality is that there are ways in which people in Baptist churches really strive to raise their children in the fear and the admonition of the Lord. And I know that, because I even said the word pagan and to just joking around, and Justin said it back to me. So just to get you off the hook with the Baptists who are listening, Justin.
I was trying to articulate a misconception, not state my question.
Yeah. But for many Baptists,
I don't want Baptists angry at me. I've seen them angry at other people. I don't want them angry.
And we're scrappy. So even though catechism is not as ubiquitous as in other traditions, it's coming back. There's the New City Catechism, which I've gone through with my own children, but any Baptist would say we read the scripture with our children. We encourage people to read Bible summaries, especially to younger children. We have family devotions at my house, family worship. We finish dinner together. And whenever we have dinner together, it's followed by a reading of, it's a Bible summary now because my youngest is 7. But then we talk about the meaning of that text and the significance for our lives. And so, we have discipleship classes at our church. We have Christian camps and summer camps. And I remember going to Awanas and I memorized more scripture than I remember now. But
I brought my daughters to Awanas when they were young, so they specifically
learn the Bible.
Yep.
Yeah.
Learn the Bible.
And so those are all means that even though that child is not we would say a member of the new covenant community, because as it's marked out by having been regenerated by Christ, they are still participating in learning about Christ. They're still being reared, as we would say, in the fear and the admonition of the Lord in those ways. And so, in fact, Thomas West and Trevin Wax, both Southeastern PhD graduates, they just put out a little book called The Gospel Way Catechism, 50 Truths That Take on the World. And on the back of it, it says, reclaiming an ancient tool of faith formation for our secular age. And you guys are like, reclaiming, well, we've already been using this thing, but for a lot of Baptists, it is kind of sort of a reclaiming. And so there is a lot of intentionality for families to raise their kids in the fear and the admonition of the Lord. However, it just looks a little bit different than in your traditions that you hold to. As we conclude, I'm encouraged to say that while Baptists have our distinctives, we are Catholic, as we said, with a little c. But that
and you just did it again. I
know. I didn't have that in my to say, but I just did it in there because of our conversation. And by this, I mean that we too have a place in the universal church. We enthusiastically affirm the triune God, affirm the Nicene Creed. We affirm the hypostatic union that grounds the person and work of Christ that brings about salvation. But to my Baptist brothers and sisters out there, I think we have good hermeneutical reasons to hold our positions, but let's look for ways to be a part of the broader Christian tradition, to express our Christian unity for the one holy and Catholic Church. And so I asked, in the words of Charles Spurgeon, I pray that we would have unity on essentials, liberty on non-essentials, and charity in all things.